They spilled coffee on a black woman at work. Her billionaire husband walks in and fires everyone. It happened on a quiet Friday afternoon, the kind of day when the office felt emptier, slower, more vulnerable. Most of the senior executives had already left for the long weekend, and the atmosphere at Veritas Media's 40th floor headquarters in Manhattan was unusually light. Amara Collins sat at her desk near the glass wall of the open-plan workspace, double-checking a comprehensive data report she had spent the entire week perfecting. Her navy blue blouse was crisp, her posture upright, her presence composed, but beneath her calm exterior was a mind constantly navigating the invisible lines of racial and social bias. She was the only black woman in the analytics division, hired 6 months ago under the company's Diversity and Innovation Initiative. The whispers had followed her from day one. She heard them in the hallways, felt them in the way meetings fell silent when she offered ideas, saw them in the polite but cold glances exchanged when she walked into the room. Then came Rachel Kent, tall, sharp, and perpetually smug. Rachel was the head of strategy. She walked up to Amara with a fresh cup of coffee in her hand and a smirk on her lips. "Oops," she said, tilting the cup deliberately. The hot liquid splashed across Amara's report and down her blouse. A gasp escaped the room. The scent of bitter roast filled the air. "You looked like you needed a little pick-me-up," Rachel said mockingly, dropping the now empty cup onto Amara's desk with a soft clink. From across the room, Trent Yates, a junior executive with too much ego and too little sense, lifted his phone and began recording. "Look, guys," he chuckled, "a diversity hire getting her morning brew the hard way." Lena Cho from HR laughed, too loudly. She was supposed to ensure safe working conditions, but she had long since sided with office politics. Amara didn't move. Coffee dripped from her blouse onto the printed pages she had worked so hard on. Her eyes locked onto Rachel's, steady and unreadable. There was no trembling lip, no tears, just silence. "You gonna call your Uber boyfriend now?" Trent chimed, aiming his camera closer. "Or maybe your activist cousin from the Bronx." What none of them knew, what not even her HR file could hint at, was that Amara Collins was not just another entry-level analyst trying to survive corporate warfare. She was the wife of Callen Monroe, CEO of Monroe Global Holdings, the parent company of Veritas Media. But Amara didn't shout. She didn't plead. Instead, with calm precision, she picked up her phone and typed a single message. "It's time." Rachel raised a brow. "Who you texting your lawyer? Your sorority sister?" Amara glanced at her watch, one that no one had ever noticed before. A rare Patek Philippe, understated and elegant. "In 15 minutes, she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. "You'll understand." And as the coffee cooled on her skin, the temperature in the room was about to shift forever. 15 minutes. That was all it took to unravel years of entitlement, unchecked arrogance, and silent cruelty. As the minutes ticked by, Amara Collins remained seated at her desk. The stain from Rachel's coffee had begun to dry, a faint brown outline framing the center of her blouse, like a wound she refused to hide. Her back was straight, her expression serene. Her fingers rested gently on the keyboard, as if she were preparing to type, but she didn't need to anymore, because the message had already been sent. Across the office, Rachel paced with a confidence born from habit. She was used to being the queen bee, her cruelty disguised as charisma, her sarcasm packaged as wit. But something about Amara's stillness, her unwavering composure, had begun to unsettle her. Rachel tried to laugh it off. "She's probably calling the diversity hotline," she joked half-heartedly to Trent and Lena, but her voice lacked its usual venom. Trent chuckled, but it was nervous now. "Right. What's she gonna do, file a complaint? We've got jokes, not lawsuits." Lena said nothing. Her eyes darted toward the elevator. It happened at exactly 3:30 p.m. The private elevator, the one reserved exclusively for board members and executives, dinged softly. Heads turned. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Everyone in the office froze. The doors parted. 3 uniformed security officers stepped out first, moving with military precision. Behind them, tall, calm, and utterly imposing, came a man in a charcoal Tom Ford suit and polished shoes that echoed against the marble floors like judgment itself. Callen Monroe, the billionaire CEO of Monroe Global Holdings, was not a man many had seen in person. His reputation preceded him: decisive, brilliant, and ruthlessly ethical. He was the kind of leader who didn't just demand results, he demanded integrity. Now, his dark eyes scanned the room like a blade, and they landed on only one person. "Amara," he said, his voice low, firm, and filled with something only she could decipher: concern, layered beneath quiet fury. "Are you okay?" Rachel's lips parted. Confusion etched across her face. Trent lowered his phone. Lena took a step back. "I'm fine," Amara replied, standing slowly. The coffee had stiffened her blouse, but her dignity stood untouched. "What the hell is going on?" Rachel snapped, stepping forward. "This is completely unprofessional. You can't just walk in here and start interrogating employees." Callen turned to face her. "Is that what you think this is?" "This is a private office," she insisted, her voice shaking now. "Amara works under me. I demand to know." "You don't demand anything," he said, his voice now a razor. "Veritas Media is a subsidiary of Monroe Global Holdings, which means this is my office. And that woman you humiliated, she's not your employee. She's my wife." The silence that followed felt like thunder with no sound. Rachel's mouth hung open. Trent blinked. "Wait, you're—" What? Lena stumbled backward, bumping into a desk. Callen stepped closer to Amara, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. "And I will not allow even a minute more of this toxic behavior in a company that bears my name." Trent stammered. We didn't know. "We were just joking." Amara turned to face them. Her voice, when it came, was soft, but it cut like glass. "6 months?" she said. "6 months I worked here. I documented every comment, every laugh, every time you ignored me in meetings, dismissed my idea, or whispered behind my back." She reached into her drawer and pulled out a thick folder. Email, Slack messages, surveillance footage, audio recordings, all showing a clear pattern of racial bias, workplace harassment, and targeted humiliation. From the elevator, a new figure emerged: Damon Lark, lead counsel for Monroe Global. He handed each of them sealed envelopes. "Formal notice of termination," Damon said, his tone flat. "Effective immediately. For cause. You are to collect your belongings under supervision. Any attempt to delete files or communicate with other employees will result in legal action." Rachel tore open the envelope and stared at the documents. You can't be serious. I'll fight this. You have no grounds. Callen held up Brad's phone, still recording from earlier. He pressed play. The video echoed through the office, Rachel's sneering voice, the splash of coffee, Trent's cruel laughter. Quote a girl, and the sound of silence from every witness who stood by and did nothing. I think we have all the grounds we need, Callen said. But I have a mortgage, Lena whispered, tears welling up. My husband just lost his job. I had bills too, Amara said, her voice calm. But that didn't stop you from trying to break me. The security guards moved forward. Rachel's posture collapsed. She tried to turn to the employees, desperate for support. Are you really going to let this happen after all I've done for this department? From the back of the office, someone stepped forward. Marcus Reyes, a junior developer. He looked Rachel in the eyes. You didn't lead us, he said. You controlled us through fear. Amara was the only one who listened. Others nodded. A quiet murmur of support spread like a wave. As the three were escorted out, Amara gathered her things slowly. She picked up her water damage report, held it for a moment, and then tossed it in the recycling bin. Callen leaned in. Do you still want to resign? She smiled. No, not anymore. I want to rebuild this place into something better. Together, they walked toward the conference room, this time not as a forgotten analyst and a silent observer, but as a force of change. Outside, the city moved on, unaware that inside Veritas Media, a revolution had just begun. The next 48 hours were unlike anything Veritas Media had ever seen. Word of what happened on the 40th floor spread across the company like wildfire. Slack channels went quiet. Internal emails slowed to a crawl. Employees who had once whispered behind Amara's back were now walking on eggshells. And while Rachel, Trent, and Lena's workstations sat empty, their names now only existed in HR files marked "Terminated for Cause." The true reckoning was just beginning. Amara Collins didn't return home that evening with the intention of celebrating. Instead, she sat beside Callen in their downtown penthouse, laptop open, uploading her archive of evidence to a secured server documents that didn't just implicate 3 employees, but revealed a culture of complicity that had festered unchecked for years. This wasn't just personal, she said, scrolling through a folder marked Veritas, Bias, Case. It was systemic. Callen nodded, placing a glass of ginger tea beside her. Then let's fix the system. The next morning, a company-wide emergency meeting was called in the Veritas Media Auditorium. Every department head, senior manager, and associate was present. The stage lights were dim. The air hung heavy with tension, the kind that came when people knew they were about to face a truth they could no longer ignore. At 9:00 a.m. sharp, Amara took the stage nod in her analyst blouse and pencil skirt, but in a tailored black suit, sharp as truth. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. My name is Amara Collins, she began. And for 6 months, I sat among you as your colleague, often invisible, often ignored. You saw my skin before you saw my skill. You dismissed my silence as submission, not dignity. But what you failed to realize is that I was watching and recording. She paused, then gestured to the large screen behind her. A title appeared in white, bold text. Project Iris, a case study of hostile corporate culture at Veritas Media. Gasps rippled through the crowd. For the next 45 minutes, Amara presented damning evidence, transcripts of meetings where her ideas were stolen and credited to others, audio clips of side conversations mocking her qualifications, video footage showing clear disparities in how she was treated versus her white colleagues. One slide showed an internal group chat named Culture Club, where memes were shared comparing Amara to stereotypes from 90s sitcoms, captioned with hashtags like Tashun diversity hire and urban outreach. But it wasn't just about her. Amara showed charts data she had quietly collected over the past few months, using Veritas' own tools, demonstrating racial and gender disparities in promotions, pay, project assignments, and employee retention. The numbers didn't lie. Bias, she said, clicking to the final slide, isn't always loud. Sometimes it whispers. And when no one speaks back, it grows into a culture. Silence filled the room. Even the most offensive faces had gone pale. Then came the second blow. From the back of the auditorium, Callen Monroe rose. The room stood taller, straighter, nervous. As of today, he announced, Veritas Media will be placed under full compliance review. Every department will undergo a diversity and ethics audit, and any employee found to have participated in discriminatory behavior will be subject to termination and potential legal action. A few people tried to object. Most stayed quiet, but Callen wasn't done. I'm also proud to announce the launch of the Amara Initiative, a $50 million investment in identifying, mentoring, and elevating Black women in technology and data science. The first round of scholarships will open next quarter, targeting first-generation college students from underrepresented communities. A stunned murmur spread, and then applause, not out of politeness, but resonance. One by one, employees stood and clapped, not for corporate protocol, but for the woman who had endured humiliation and turned it into revolution. But the most powerful moment came afterward, as employees filtered out, unsure what to say. One young woman, barely out of college, approached Amara quietly. I just wanted to say, thank you, she said, her voice trembling. I applied here because I wanted to believe I could belong. After what you did today, I know I can. Amara's eyes softened. She didn't need validation, but that moment one voice among many meant more than any title. In the weeks that followed, the Amara Initiative became national news. The story of what had happened at Veritas was featured in Forbes, the New York Times, and across social media under the hashtag #NeourAmara Effect. Her name became synonymous with quiet resistance, intelligent justice, and systemic reform. And for those who once laughed in back offices and made side comments in Slack, life moved in a very different direction. Rachel Kent tried to sue for wrongful termination. Her case was dropped after Callen's legal team presented the full video footage. Trent Yates failed to get another job in media. His name appeared on informal do not hire lists, shared quietly by HR departments across the city. Lena Cho deleted her LinkedIn and resurfaced under a new name in a remote marketing firm in Oregon, never acknowledging what had happened. But Amara didn't speak of revenge. She wasn't interested in ruin. She was building something better. At a TED Talk 3 months later, Amara stood on stage wearing the same black suit. When they poured coffee on me, she said, they didn't know they were watering a seed. That seed became a movement, not because I shouted, but because I refused to be erased. And in the crowd, seated quietly beside their daughter, were her parents, her mother in a nurse's uniform. her father still wearing his MTA badge. They had worked their entire lives so that one day, Amara could be seen not for her color, not for her gender, but for her power. And now, the world finally saw her clearly. The months following Amara Collins' presentation were nothing short of a metamorphosis, both for Veritas Media and for the corporate world watching from afar. At the center of it all was a woman who had once been underestimated, dismissed, and humiliated in a public office space. Now, she was the architect of a transformation so deep it would shake the very foundation of how companies define inclusion, power, and accountability. Veritas Media underwent a complete structural audit, beginning with the board of directors. Those who had turned a blind eye to complaints, who had signed off on biased promotions or ignored internal red flags, were asked to resign. Some resisted until they were shown the data Amara had collected, cold and undeniable. Callen Monroe appointed Dr. Leona Rivers, a renowned civil rights and workplace ethics scholar, as interim chief ethics officer. Leona's mandate was clear: tear down what's broken and build a framework where discrimination would no longer have a shadow to hide in. Mandatory anti-bias training began, but it wasn't performative. It was immersive, driven by real-life stories, anonymous employee testimonies, and guided workshops that required real participation, not just boxes checked. Amara was offered an executive seat, but she declined. "I don't want a title," she told Callen. "I want impact." Instead, she became senior strategic advisor for equity and innovation, reporting directly to the board with full independence and authority to challenge anything, at any level. Amara's once overlooked side project, Project Lighthouse, the AI-powered system she had designed in secret, became the beating heart of Veritas' transformation. Originally built to detect inefficiencies in data structures, the tool had evolved under Amara's guidance into something more revolutionary: a pattern detection algorithm that exposed bias in internal systems, including promotions, performance evaluations, in-team assignments. Within 2 weeks of implementation, Lighthouse flagged 73 instances of systemic disparity. Some were subtle, such as consistently assigning high-impact projects to a small group of white employees. Others were blatant, like an executive who had never promoted a single woman or person of color in 7 years. No one could dispute the data. It didn't accuse, it illuminated. Callen announced that Monroe Global Holdings would license Lighthouse to Fortune 500 companies. Under one condition, they would have to publish anonymized transparency reports to the public. No secrecy, no hiding behind HR walls. Microsoft, Google, and Netflix signed on first. Within 3 months, over 600 companies joined. The Lighthouse Standard was born. By now, the media had coined a term for the movement: the Amara effect. It described what happened when someone long silenced chose to speak quietly, calmly, but with truth sharpened by evidence and purpose. HR departments across America began reevaluating how they handled complaints. CEOs started paying attention to Slack messages, not just profit margins. But perhaps the most profound change wasn't in policies, it was in perception. For too long, companies had treated diversity as a checklist, not a value. Amara's story reminded the world that representation wasn't enough if it came with humiliation, and inclusion meant nothing if it was built on tolerance instead of respect. At Columbia University, a business ethics course introduced a new module titled "Justice as Strategy: The Case of Amara Collins." Her story became required reading at Wharton and Harvard. Students debated her decisions, her restraint, her refusal to use power for revenge. Some called her too soft, others called her brilliant, but no one denied the results. Despite the accolades, the press, and the now global recognition, Amara remained grounded. She still took the subway. She still visited her parents every Sunday. And she still kept the original coffee stain report in her desk drawer, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. "What keeps you going?" a journalist once asked her. Amara smiled softly. "The silence. I remember what it felt like when no one said anything. I want to make sure no one else feels that invisible again." Behind the scenes, not everything was graceful. Rachel Kent attempted to sue Monroe Global for defamation. The lawsuit was dismissed in minutes, her lawyer citing irrefutable digital evidence. Trent Yates, once a fast-rising star in digital strategy, had applied to over 30 companies and received 0 offers. Rumor had it he was driving for a food delivery app in the same neighborhood he used to mock. Lena Cho vanished from public view entirely. Some said she moved to a small town and opened a bookstore. Others said she was still writing apology letters, none of which had ever been answered. Amara knew her time at Veritas wasn't forever. 6 months after the reckoning, she stood before the same staff she once stood in front of as an outsider. This time, they listened not out of fear, but out of respect. "I'm leaving my role at Veritas," she announced, "but not because I'm finished, because it's your turn now." A hush fell. "I'm founding the Equity Bridge Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to building tools like Lighthouse and supporting underrepresented voices in tech. I'm not walking away from this mission. I'm just walking forward." As she stepped down from the podium, every person in the room stood, and for the first time since that quiet Friday when she was soaked in shame and sarcasm, Amara walked out of Veritas not as someone who survived a toxic system, but as someone who redefined it. The exit of Amara Collins from Veritas Media wasn't the end of her journey. It was the beginning of something much greater. Within a month of her departure, headlines around the world read, "Amara Collins launches $50 million scholarship fund for Black women in tech. From analyst to architect of change, the woman who rewrote corporate culture." But Amara didn't care for titles or press. Her focus was razor-sharp, build a bridge for others who were told, just as she once had been, that they didn't belong. The Collins Catalyst Fund, named not just after Amara but her parents, Denise and Marcus Collins, was built with 3 key goals. 1. Fund 1,000 full scholarships for young Black women pursuing degrees in data science, computer engineering, and artificial intelligence. 2. Provide long-term mentorship through a network of professionals from Fortune 500 companies. 3. Create paid internship pipelines for scholars into companies that passed rigorous diversity accountability metrics. The seed capital came from 3 sources: Callen Monroe's personal donation of $20 million, the reinvested licensing fees from Project Lighthouse, now used in over 1,200 companies globally, and perhaps most poetically, court-ordered penalties and forfeited stock options from former Veritas executives who had been terminated due to workplace misconduct. Within its first 6 months, the Collins Catalyst Fund had already selected 127 students, young women, from overlooked neighborhoods in cities like Detroit, Baltimore, Atlanta, and the Bronx. Most were first-generation college students. All were brilliant, and every single one of them carried a story just like Amara's. As the fund expanded, Amara turned her attention back to what she loved most: building solutions. During the darkest period of her time at Veritas, Amara had been quietly working on something beyond Lighthouse, a more personal, more direct form of justice, a tool that didn't just detect bias in systems, but gave employees the power to report, document, and analyze discrimination from within. That project became Code Equa. The app allowed employees to log incidents in real time with encrypted voice and visual data, use AI to identify repeat patterns of microaggressions and workplace bias, compare their treatment with anonymized workplace benchmarks, automatically generate legal-grade reports for HR or external review boards. Code Equa was beta tested with 20 companies under Monroe Global's umbrella. The results were immediate and transformative. False complaints dropped. Real ones were no longer dismissed. Companies began to understand what lived bias looked like. Not just statistical disparities. Amara made a defining choice. Code Equa would be free to use for nonprofits, schools, and startups under 100 employees. "I want accountability," she said in a TEDx announcement, "not gatekeeping." The impact was staggering. Within a year, Code Equa was downloaded over 5 million times, adopted by not only corporations, but universities, law firms, and hospitals. Its real-time data became a global equity barometer, and Amara was soon called upon to brief the United Nations on tech-driven civil rights mechanisms. With innovation came attention. Amara was named one of Time magazine's 100 most influential people. Her face appeared on the covers of Wired, Forbes, and Fast Company, often with headlines that read, "The Quiet Architect of Corporate Justice," or "The Woman Who Made Data Feel Human." But she remained grounded. When asked how she celebrated her milestones, she replied simply, "I call my mom, I light a candle, then I get back to work." It wasn't humility, it was focus, because she knew that while the tech industry applauded her now, they hadn't changed. Not fully. "We're not here to decorate corporate brochures," she told an audience at Stanford. "We're here to design new blueprints where equity isn't a PR campaign, but a product feature." Behind the movement, though, was still a woman who had once sat in a cubicle soaked in coffee. Silence and shame. Amara never forgot that day, but she no longer viewed it as her lowest point. She saw it as a pivot. Her healing wasn't just personal, it was communal. She created a podcast series called Fuel, where professionals of color shared their stories of workplace injustice, not just to vent, but to reframe pain as purpose. Episode titles included "The Promotion That Never Came," "He Called Me Aggressive, I Was Just Clear," "From HR Complaint to COO." Each episode ended the same way, with the storyteller answering the question, "What would you tell your younger self sitting in that meeting?" Amara's own answer: "They may try to write you out, but you're the one holding the pen." By the second year, the Collins Catalyst Fund expanded its scholarship reach to Canada, South Africa, and the UK. Code Equa had translated versions in Spanish, French, and Zulu. Amara formed an international coalition of female technologists and equity experts, the Equity Guild, who advised governments and multinational corporations on inclusive innovation. Her influence had transcended borders, industries, and even ideologies. She wasn't just a tech figure. She had become a symbol of principled power, proof that you could confront injustice with clarity, not chaos, that you could rise without crushing others, that dignity and data could dismantle old empires. One morning, Amara woke to a handwritten letter at her doorstep. It was from a 17-year-old scholarship recipient in Atlanta. It read, "Dear Miss Collins, I used to believe the world wasn't built for people like me, but then I saw what you built. I want to do the same. Thank you for leaving the door open and lighting the hallway." Amara held that letter to her chest. This was why she didn't shout in the boardroom. Why she didn't retaliate when she had the power to. Because some revolutions don't begin with riots. They begin with restraint, with strategy, with one woman refusing to stay small. As she walked into a meeting that day with leaders from the World Economic Forum, Amara smiled quietly to herself. It had all started with a splash of coffee, and now it was changing the world. 1 year to the day since she sat in that glass-walled office with coffee dripping down her blouse. Amara Collins stood center stage at the Metropolitan Opera House in Manhattan. The chandelier above glittered like 1,000 quiet stars. The air in the auditorium was reverent, electric, full of the kind of silence that only precedes transformation. On the large screen behind her, a single title appeared, Code Amara, How One Voice Shifted a Global System. The room erupted into applause, not the polite kind reserved for ceremony, but a standing ovation filled with gratitude, awe, and something deeper recognition. Amara stood tall, wrapped in a black satin gown, minimalist, regal, no designer logos, no flash, just her presence intentional, grounded, unshakable. She approached the microphone, looked across the room filled with CEOs, scholars, activists, and most importantly, hundreds of scholarship recipients from the Collins Catalyst Fund, all wearing pins engraved with the word belong. She began softly. "A year ago today, they poured coffee on me. They laughed. They dismissed me. But what they didn't realize was they were pouring fuel." The audience leaned in. Fuel for a fire I'd kept quiet for too long. Fuel for an engine built from data, dignity, and direction. She spoke not of revenge, but of systems, not of hate, but of healing. In the past year, the Collins Catalyst Fund had supported 1,027 scholars across 5 countries. Code Equal had been adopted by 2,000 companies and government institutions. Over 37 discriminatory workplace lawsuits had been preemptively prevented by its reporting system. But numbers were not what moved Amara. What moved her were the handwritten letters, the texts from mothers who finally saw their daughters thrive, the girl from Johannesburg who built her own app to stop school bullying, the shy boy in London who told her, "Your voice helped me find mine." She looked toward the front row, where her parents sat, her mother in a nurse's white coat, her father in a navy suit, his calloused hands trembling as he held the Nobel Peace Prize that had just been placed in their daughter's name for innovation in social justice technology. Amara's voice broke, just slightly. "I used to wonder if I had to change to be accepted, but now I know we don't have to shrink to fit into broken systems. We build new ones." As the lights dimmed and the orchestra swelled for the documentary premiere, one more message appeared on screen. Sometimes a revolution doesn't start with noise. It starts with one person, choosing not to stay silent. And as Amara walked off stage, a 16-year-old girl in the back row whispered to her friend, "One day, I want to be like her." The movement didn't end. It multiplied. This story is not just about a woman who endured public humiliation. It's about what happens when someone refuses to let cruelty define them. Amara Collins turned pain into power, silence into strategy, and injustice into a blueprint for change. She didn't retaliate with rage. She responded with clarity, truth, and relentless purpose. In a world that often rewards noise, she chose precision. Where others sought validation, she built solutions. Her journey reminds us that real strength is not loud. It's unwavering. Amara's story is a call to action for every person who's ever been told they don't belong in the boardroom, at the table, or in the conversation. It's proof that one voice, when grounded in truth and vision, can shake entire systems and light the way for generations. True justice isn't about revenge. It's about building a world where no one else has to experience the same pain. And sometimes, the most powerful revolutions begin with quiet dignity and the courage to say, enough. If you've ever felt unseen, overlooked, or underestimated, remember this: you don't need permission to matter. You already do. Stand firm. Speak up. Build something that outlasts the noise. Your story could be the start of someone else's freedom.